Hook, what would you do if the thing under your bed wasn't just a childhood fear, but a very real, very hungry entity? I thought it was just noises. Then it left bruises. Then it sat on my bed. And then, it showed itself. Story, the thing under my bed. The first sign was the cold. Not the biting chill of a winter night, but a creeping, insidious cold that radiated from beneath my bed, even in the height of summer. I'd wake up shivering, pulling my duvet tighter, convinced the air conditioning was on too high. But the thermostat would always read a comfortable 72 degrees. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed. Just like the scratches. Faint, rhythmic scraping sounds that seemed to emanate from the floorboards directly beneath my mattress. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe mice. Old houses made noises. My parents, bless their oblivious hearts, agreed. My name is Alex, and I was 17 when it started. My bedroom was on the second floor, a cozy space with a window overlooking the oak tree in our backyard. The bed itself was a simple wooden frame, low to the ground, with just enough space underneath for a few storage boxes. I used to like that space, it felt secure, enclosed. Now, it felt like a void. The cold intensified. It became a palpable presence, a pocket of frigid air that seemed to swell and recede. I started sleeping with extra blankets, even though the rest of the room was stifling. The scratches, too, grew more distinct, morphing from vague scuttles into something that sounded uncannily like fingernails dragging across wood. Long, deliberate strokes, followed by a lighter, almost hesitant tap. Sometimes, I swore I could hear a soft, rustling sound, like crumpled paper or dry leaves being disturbed. I started leaving my bedside lamp on, a weak beacon against the encroaching dread. I'd lie there, rigid, listening to the unseen thing under my bed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Logic fought with terror. It had to be an animal. A very persistent squirrel, perhaps. But the sounds were too deliberate, too intelligent. One night, the scratches stopped abruptly. A heavy, sickly sweet smell filled the room, like decaying flowers mixed with something metallic. It made my stomach churn. I clamped a hand over my mouth, eyes watering. Then, a new sound. A soft, ragged breathing. It was slow, uneven, and utterly inhuman. It was coming from directly beneath me. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. The breathing continued, a moist, rasping sound. It sounded impossibly close, as if whatever was under there was pressed against the underside of my mattress. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I wanted to scream, to leap out of bed, but I was paralyzed by a primal terror. The breathing paused, then resumed, a little louder, a little closer, and then, I felt it. A slight indentation in my mattress, just beneath my right calf. Like something was pushing up from below. I whimpered, a tiny, involuntary sound. The indentation deepened. I could feel the distinct impression of what felt like a single, elongated finger pressing against the mattress. It moved slowly, dragging upwards towards my knee. I finally broke. With a choked cry, I scrambled off the bed, stumbling backwards until my back hit the wall. My lamp, still bravely shining, cast long, distorted shadows around the room. I stared at the space under my bed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Nothing. Just the familiar storage boxes. The cold was still there, a faint, lingering presence, but the breathing, the smell, the indentation, they were gone. My parents, roused by my scream, found me huddled in the corner, shaking. I mumbled something about a nightmare, a bad dream. They looked at each other, worried. "Maybe you're just stressed, honey," my mom said, her voice soft. "School's starting soon." They didn't believe me. How could they? The incident only solidified my certainty. It wasn't a dream. It was real. And it was under my bed. I stopped sleeping in my room, opting for the couch downstairs, citing a sudden aversion to my stuffy bedroom. My parents were confused but didn't push it. My little sister, Sarah, thought it was hilarious. But even downstairs, I couldn't escape it entirely. The cold sometimes seeped into the living room, a faint, undeniable chill. The memory of the finger-like pressure, the ragged breathing, haunted my waking hours. I became obsessed with the space under my bed. During the day, when the sun streamed through my window and normalcy felt possible, I would creep into my room, armed with a flashlight, and peer underneath. I'd pull out the storage boxes, scattering their contents, desperate to find some logical explanation. A hidden vent? A loose floorboard? Nothing. Just dust bunnies and the faint scent of old wood. But sometimes, very rarely, I'd catch a fleeting glimpse. A shadow, too deep, too still, even for the dim light under the bed. A flicker of movement at the very back, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. My heart would pound, but before I could truly focus, it would be gone, swallowed by the darkness. I started drawing. Obsessively. I drew the space under my bed, trying to visualize what was there. I drew elongated fingers, gaunt limbs, eyes that glowed with an unsettling luminescence. The drawings became my secret journal, a way to process the escalating terror that I couldn't share with anyone. Then came the new, more insidious attacks. I'd wake up with unexplained bruises on my ankles and wrists, like something had gripped me in the night. My clothes would be slightly shifted in my closet, as if someone had rummaged through them. And the whispers, faint, almost inaudible, but undeniably there. They were unintelligible, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to coil around my thoughts, making me feel as if I was losing my mind. One evening, I was doing homework at my desk, my back to the bed. The lamp was on, the room brightly lit. I heard a soft creak from behind me. I froze. It was the sound of a spring shifting, like someone had just sat on my bed. My heart leapt into my throat. I slowly turned, my eyes wide with terror. My duvet was slightly rumpled, a clear depression in the center of the mattress. And sitting there, perched on the edge of my bed, was a small, dusty teddy bear I hadn't played with since I was 8. It had been in a box under the bed. I had seen it there just that morning. It was now sitting upright, its glass eyes staring directly at me, a faint trail of dust clinging to its worn fur. I screamed. A raw, guttural sound that tore through the silence of the house. My parents rushed in. They saw the teddy bear, confused. "Did you put that there, honey?" My mom asked, picking it up. I just pointed, trembling, at the space under my bed. They exchanged worried glances. "Alex," my dad said, his voice firm, "we need to talk." They arranged for me to see a therapist. I went, I talked, I pretended. I told her I was stressed, that my imagination was running wild. It was easier than trying to explain the unexplainable. But inside, a plan was forming. I couldn't live like this. I had to face it. That night, I waited. I stayed awake, heart pounding, listening to the familiar sounds. The cold, the scratches, the ragged breathing. It was all there, amplified by my desperate resolve. I had moved my old wooden baseball bat from the closet and placed it beside my bed. A pathetic weapon, I knew, but it was all I had. The breathing became more insistent. The cold intensified until I could see my own breath misting in the air. The smell, sickeningly sweet, filled the room. The indentation in the mattress returned, moving slowly up my leg, pressing harder this time. I took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it. "I know you're there," I whispered, my voice trembling but firm. "Show yourself." The breathing stopped. The pressure on my leg vanished. A terrifying silence descended. I held my breath, straining my ears, my eyes fixed on the blackness beneath my bed. Then, a sound so soft I almost missed it. A faint click. And then, from the deepest shadows under my bed, 2 points of sickly yellow light emerged. They were eyes. Narrow, cat-like, and filled with an ancient, predatory intelligence. They stared at me, unblinking. The yellow lights began to drift forward, slowly, deliberately, emerging from the darkness. As they did, a vague shape began to coalesce around them. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs seeming to bend at unnatural angles. Its skin, if it even had skin, was the color of dried earth, and its long, slender fingers ended in sharpened claws that glinted faintly in the dim light from my lamp. It was hairless, its head too large for its emaciated body, with no discernible nose or mouth, just a gaping void beneath the eyes that seemed to absorb the light around it. It slid out from under the bed with a soft, scraping sound, not walking, but gliding, its limbs barely touching the floor. It unfolded itself, stretching to an impossible height, its head almost brushing the ceiling. The cold intensified to an unbearable degree, radiating from its very being. The sickly sweet smell became overwhelming, suffocating. It didn't speak with a voice, but with a thought, a cold, piercing presence in my mind. "You see me now, Alex. Good. You're ready." Ready for what? My mind screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. I gripped the bat, my knuckles white. The creature tilted its head, the yellow eyes fixing on me with an unnerving intensity. It extended one long, clawed finger towards me, slowly, as if in a grotesque greeting. It was coming for me. It had been under my bed, watching, waiting, feeding. It wasn't just a thing, it was a predator. And in that moment, as the creature loomed over me, its unnatural form filling my bedroom with cold and dread, I knew with chilling certainty that the real horror wasn't what was under my bed. It was what had finally come out from under it. I didn't think. I reacted. With a primal roar ripped from the depths of my terror, I swung the baseball bat, not at its head, but at its elongated arm. There was no satisfying thud of impact, no bone-jarring crack. The bat passed through it, as if it were nothing but mist, a momentary ripple in the air. The creature didn't flinch. Its yellow eyes simply widened fractionally, a hint of something akin to amusement glinting within them. A futile gesture, its thought echoed in my mind, colder than ever. Panic seized me, absolute and overwhelming. I dropped the bat, my legs rubbery. This wasn't something I could fight, not with physical means. It was something else entirely. Something beyond comprehension, beyond logic. It was an entity, and it had finally revealed itself. It took another slow, gliding step towards me, its form flickering slightly at the edges, as if struggling to maintain its physical presence in this reality. The void where its mouth should be seemed to stretch, pulling in the ambient light. I didn't wait. With a desperate sob, I turned and bolted. I didn't stop to grab my phone, or even think about my family. I burst out of my bedroom, slammed the door shut behind me, and stumbled down the stairs, 3 at a time, my heart threatening to explode from my chest. I didn't look back. I just ran, out the front door, into the cool night air, leaving the cold, the smell, and the terrifying yellow eyes behind me. I never went back to that house. Not even for my things. The nightmare under my bed had finally come out, and it would forever haunt the edges of my sanity. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel a faint, inexplicable chill, or catch a whiff of that sickly sweet scent. And I wonder, just for a moment, if it ever found a new bed to hide under. Or if it's still waiting. I survived. But survival came at a cost. I lost my innocence, my peace of mind, and ultimately, my home. That creature, that thing, showed me a darkness I never knew existed, a terror that defies explanation. I live with it now, the chilling knowledge that such entities exist, that they watch, and that they hunt. And while I may never fully understand what it truly was, or why it chose my bed, I know one thing for certain: the space beneath your bed isn't always empty. And sometimes, it's not the monsters under your bed you should fear, but the ones they leave behind in your head. We all see ourselves in the mirror, but what happens when the reflection stops being you? For Liam, a portrait artist, his studio mirror became a battleground. Join me as we uncover the terrifying tale of the man whose own reflection decided it wanted out. Liam, a portrait artist by trade and a perfectionist by nature, considered his studio his sanctuary. Amidst the comforting chaos of half-finished canvases, scattered brushes, and the rich, earthy scent of oil paint, stood a monumental antique mirror. It wasn't just a decorative piece, it was Liam's most crucial tool, a silent partner in his relentless pursuit of capturing the human spirit. Hours would dissolve as he stood before its polished surface, meticulously contorting his own features, observing every minute shift in expression, every nuanced emotion reflected back. He'd frown, grimace, laugh, and weep, all in the service of understanding the subtle dance of the human face. His own reflection was a constant, dependable model, always there, always in sync. The first hint of discord was so fleeting, so minuscule, that Liam almost dismissed it as a trick of the light or a symptom of his own fatigue. He was practicing a look of weary contemplation, eyes half-lidded, when he blinked. And then, a hair's breadth of a second later, his reflection blinked. It was hardly noticeable, a temporal hiccup in the otherwise flawless synchronization. He shook his head, attributing it to an optical illusion, a momentary lapse in his own perception. He moved on, the incident relegated to the forgotten corners of his mind. But the glitches, like persistent, insidious whispers, began to multiply. They were subtle at first, easily rationalized away. He frowned, and his reflection would hold a faint, unsettling smile for a beat too long. He'd raise a hand, and his mirrored counterpart's fingers would twitch, a millisecond before mirroring his own movement. Liam, ever the keen observer, started to test it. He'd move swiftly, abruptly, trying to catch it off guard. He'd blink rapidly, shift his gaze, twitch his nose. The reflection always caught up, a fraction of a second behind, never quite perfect, like a poorly dubbed film where the words and the lips never quite aligned. The subtle desynchronization, once a dismissible anomaly, now pricked at his meticulous artist's mind, a discordant note in a finely tuned symphony. Then came the chilling leap into true independence. One afternoon, lost in thought about a commission, Liam found his reflection's eyes wide with a terror he didn't feel, its mouth is silent, a shape scream while his own face remained placid, calm. Another time, his reflection held an invisible brush, mimicking the strokes of a painting he hadn't even conceived. The realization dawned, cold and sharp, this was no longer just his reflection. This was something else. He tried to ignore it, to simply look away, to focus on his work, but the mirror was a magnet, its silent presence pulling his gaze back like an invisible thread. In a desperate attempt to reclaim his sanity, he tried covering the antique glass with a thick painter's cloth, but the oppressive weight of its unseen presence remained, a chilling shroud in the room. He could feel it watching him, even through the fabric. The reflection's actions escalated, growing bolder within its mirrored confines. Liam watched, horrified and transfixed, as his reflection opened a drawer on the mirrored desk that was, in his reality, firmly closed. It rearranged a stack of mirrored books on a shelf, its movements precise and deliberate. These were always small, unsettling movements, confined to the mirror world, yet profoundly disturbing. He was witnessing a secret life, a phantom existence playing out parallel to his own, just beyond the glass, utterly inaccessible to anyone but him. The casual disinterest in his reflection's eyes gave way to something far more sinister. They became cold, calculating, and unnervingly intense. It stared at him, not with the familiar gaze of self-reflection, but with the appraising, almost predatory look of an entity studying its prey. Liam began to feel a creeping dread whenever he entered the studio, a primal unease that prickled his skin. The mirror, once his confidant, his indispensable tool, was now a watchful, malevolent eye, its gaze a tangible weight upon him. The breach occurred on a crisp Tuesday morning, shattering the last vestiges of Liam's denial. He awoke, still half asleep and disoriented, to find a small, intricately carved wooden bird perched on his real-world desk. His blood ran cold. He had seen that bird before. Just yesterday, his reflection had picked it up from a mirrored shelf, examining it with disturbing fascination. The drawer it had opened in the mirror world was precisely where he kept a collection of such trinkets. The reflection wasn't just acting within its own realm anymore, it was influencing his. It was crossing over. Terror, cold and absolute, seized Liam. He had to destroy it. He grabbed a heavy bronze sculpture from his desk, its familiar weight now a desperate comfort in his trembling hand. He raised it, aiming for the very center of the mirror, the malevolent nexus of his nightmare. But as the sculpture arced downwards, a strange resilience seemed to emanate from the glass. It vibrated, humming with an unseen energy, deflecting the blow with an invisible force field. The sculpture bounced off the surface with a dull thud, as if striking solid rock. He tried again, and again, his arm aching, the bronze impotent against the unyielding surface. His reflection, meanwhile, was no longer a mere imitation. As Liam struggled, its face began to contort, morphing into a monstrous parody of his own, the skin stretching and pulling like melting wax. Its eyes, once calculating, now glowed with an unholy, malevolent light, burning holes through the glass. The reflection mimicked his desperate movements, but his fingers curled into grotesque claws, long and razor-sharp, scraping at the unseen barrier. A guttural growl, not his own, echoed from the depths of the mirror. Suddenly, a hand, scaled and monstrous, shot through the shimmering surface of the glass, its clawed fingers reaching, grasping, dripping with an unseen, viscous ichor. It was no longer a reflection, it was a gateway, a horrifying portal. The monstrous limb lunged for Liam, its intent horrifyingly clear. He scrambled backward, falling over his easel, the air around him growing cold and thick with an alien presence. The mirror pulsed, its surface rippling like disturbed water, and within its depths, the demonic reflection pulled, its distorted face screaming, trying to drag him into its terrifying world, a world where the reflection was not just alive, but hungered for his reality. The line between what was real and what was merely reflected had blurred, then shattered, and the reflection was winning. Liam scrambled backward, the bronze sculpture clattering uselessly against the studio floor. The clawed hand from the mirror flexed, its grotesque fingers twitching, beckoning. The cold radiating from the glass was no longer just a chill, it was a physical force, a palpable vacuum trying to pull him in. He could feel the fine hairs on his arms standing on end, his breath catching in his throat. The monstrous face in the mirror, a twisted, ghoulish parody of his own, grinned wider, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its eyes, glowing with an infernal light, fixed on his, searing through him. He pushed himself against the opposite wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The reflected hand stretched further, its wrist contorting at an unnatural angle, the fingernails elongating into dark, curved talons that scraped against the very air in his studio. He could hear a faint, scraping sound, like fingernails on a chalkboard, emanating from the mirror's surface. It wasn't just reaching, it was clawing its way out. Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to consume him. He looked wildly around the studio, searching for anything, a weapon, an escape, a way to break free from this impossible nightmare. His gaze fell upon a heavy, iron easel, one he used for his largest canvases. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he lunged for it, dragging its weighty frame across the floor, the metal scraping harshly against the wooden planks. The reflection shrieked, a sound that was both his and utterly alien, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air. The hand in the mirror recoiled slightly, as if the sound had caused it momentary pain. This unexpected reaction, however brief, ignited a flicker of desperate hope within Liam. Noise, disrupting the eerie silence of the studio, seemed to affect it. He pushed the easel with all his might, aiming its sharp, iron foot directly at the center of the mirror. This time, there was no invisible barrier, no subtle deflection. The iron leg struck with a sickening crunch. The glass didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed, a chaotic constellation of cracks radiating outwards from the point of impact. From within the fractured depths, the reflection let out another piercing shriek, its monstrous face distorting further, the features melting and reforming like molten plastic. But the breach was still there. Through a crack that ran like a jagged lightning bolt, he could see the reflection's glowing eye, narrowed in malevolent fury. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air, and he saw the monstrous hand begin to push, slowly, relentlessly, against the fragile barrier of the glass, widening the crack with sheer force. Liam knew, with a horrifying certainty, that the cracks were not enough. He needed to destroy it completely, to obliterate the gateway to whatever unspeakable horror lay beyond. His eyes darted around the room again. His gaze landed on a canister of turpentine, a volatile solvent he used for cleaning his brushes. A desperate, dangerous idea sparked in his mind. Ignoring the pain in his arm and the growing dread in his gut, Liam snatched the turpentine. The reflected hand, now a full forearm, was pushing through the largest crack, its claws extending, reaching for him once more. He uncapped the canister with trembling fingers, the acrid smell stinging his nostrils. "Get back!" he screamed, his voice hoarse, as he hurled the turpentine at the mirror. The liquid splashed across the fractured surface, running in rivulets down the glass. The reflection roared, a sound of agony and rage combined. Where the turpentine touched, the reflected image seemed to blister in smoke, the monstrous features dissolving into a swirling vortex of black and grey. But it wasn't enough. The hand was still there, twitching, a tangible threat. He needed fire. His eyes darted to his gas-powered soldering iron, left on his workbench from a recent frame repair. It was still warm. Without a second thought, he grabbed it. As he turned back, the reflection surged forward within the mirror, its entire monstrous upper torso appearing through the widening cracks, straining against the glass. Its other hand, equally clawed and grotesque, appeared through another fracture, grasping at the air, trying to find purchase. The two hands lunged for him, a silent, ravenous attack. Liam raised the soldering iron, it stood glowing faintly. He slammed it against the turpentine-soaked glass, aiming for the core of the reflected monstrosity. There was a sickening sizzle, a burst of acrid smoke, and then, with a deafening crack that vibrated through the very foundations of the studio, the mirror exploded inwards. Shards of glass rained down, glittering like deadly diamonds. A blast of icy wind ripped through the room, carrying with it a faint, dying shriek that seemed to echo from an immeasurable distance. The monstrous form in the mirror flickered, contorted one last time into a mask of pure anguish, and then vanished, swallowed by the darkness behind the shattered frame. Liam stood panting, shards of glass embedded in his clothes, a few drawing thin lines of blood on his exposed skin. The air in the studio was still, the oppressive cold having dissipated. The antique mirror frame remained, a jagged, empty maw staring blankly at him. It was over. He slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor, his body shaking uncontrollably. The silence in the studio was profound, broken only by his ragged breathing. He looked at his hands, then at the empty space where his reflection had been. For years, it had been a tool, a constant companion. Now, it was a gaping void, a reminder of the nightmare he had just escaped. In the days that followed, Liam boarded up the empty mirror frame, covering it with thick canvas, then with layers of old blankets, as if trying to bury the memory of what had transpired. He moved his easel to face the window, preferring the unreliable light of the outside world to the silent judgment of his own image. He still painted, but the act was now tinged with a deep-seated apprehension. He found himself avoiding reflective surfaces, even simple puddles, a subconscious fear that another, more monstrous version of himself might be waiting just beneath the surface. He never fully understood what had happened, what malevolent entity had taken root in his reflection. But he knew, with chilling certainty, that some things were best left unbroken, and some reflections were best left unexamined. The glitch in the reflection had left him scarred, not just physically, but deep within his very perception of reality. He was an artist who had once sought to capture the truth of the human form, but now, he only saw the fragile, permeable boundary between himself and the terrifying unknown.